There are moments when certain life patterns seem inevitable, almost as if you're trapped in a gear that won't stop turning. You wake up, work, pay bills, accumulate things, and repeat. These behaviors begin subtly, often as an attempt to achieve security, freedom, or simply a feeling that you're doing the right thing. Over time, however, these choices transform into habits, and what once seemed like a solution for adult life ends up becoming an invisible prison. The pursuit of more money, more achievements, more accumulation gradually becomes a routine that consumes everything. But what's really behind this cycle? What drives someone to keep running even when they realize they're exhausted? The truth is that this behavior isn't just about money or material success. It's frequently an expression of something deeper, an attempt to fill a void that seems impossible to fill. The person doesn't act only out of ambition or immediate need for security, but from the belief that somehow, accumulating more will finally bring the peace they've been searching for. Even though on the surface, this may seem like progress, what's often at stake is a hidden escape from inner silence, an attempt to avoid existential questions that frighten, an invisible pain that escapes conscious control. Have you ever wondered why some people seem to sink into a financial race with no possible return, while others mysteriously manage to live with less and seem happier? The relationship between money and happiness is one of the most complex and challenging questions of human existence. In our society, this pursuit presents itself in various forms, from the obsessive accumulation of goods to compulsive work behaviors that often hide a deep existential void. What's behind this almost uncontrollable need to always have more? Is it just healthy ambition, or is there something deeper, something most of us can't see? In this video, we're going to explore the relationship between money and happiness through the lens of Henry David Thoreau, a philosopher who dedicated years of his life to understanding what really matters. Investigating how this pursuit manifests and why sometimes it becomes a cycle that's difficult to break, we'll see that our behaviors regarding money aren't just responses to external needs, but reflections of unresolved internal conflicts. Our goal here is to better understand this race, not just as a behavioral problem, but as a symptom of something much deeper. For Thoreau, the relentless pursuit of money isn't simply a character flaw or lack of discipline, but an expression of human life out of balance. Thoreau believed that this race, in its essence, is a form of escape, an attempt to deal with the fear of insignificance or with an existential void that we don't know how to face. When an individual can't confront their own internal questions, when they don't know who they really are or what they genuinely desire, they may seek refuge in accumulation behaviors that end up offering a temporary solution for a much deeper pain. Thoreau saw life as a totality, a complex network of conscious and unconscious choices. When someone falls into this race for money, it's often an unconscious attempt to fill an inner void that cannot be filled with external things. This void can arise in various forms, from the lack of meaning in daily life, from emotional disconnection with what really matters, or from aspects of personality that haven't been recognized or accepted. The person works non-stop, accumulates without realizing it, but inside continues feeling that something fundamental is missing. Thoreau also believed that this pursuit can be seen as a form of escape from the deeper reality of existence. In moments of stress, anguish, or existential crisis, the individual may take refuge in excessive work or compulsive accumulation as an attempt to escape life's big questions. However, this escape is never permanent, and the return to reality tends to be even more difficult. This generates a vicious cycle where the race for money doesn't solve the existential problem, but only aggravates it, creating increasingly thick layers of distraction. In his book Walden, Thoreau wrote something that echoes to this day. The mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation. What is called resignation is confirmed desperation. This phrase captures the essence of how many live their lives, trapped in routines they didn't consciously choose, following patterns that society imposed, working in jobs that drain their energy, all in the name of financial security that never seems sufficient. It's as if, after years in this race, you still remain unsatisfied and have to immediately strive to get more. Thoreau defines this dysfunctional relationship with money as any repeated life pattern in which the person feels obligated to persist, regardless of the negative impact this has on their inner peace, their relationships, and their health. When we think about this pursuit, it's common to focus only on excessive work. However, this race manifests in many other equally destructive forms: compulsive consumption, the need to impress others, constant comparison on social media, the paralyzing fear of having less than the neighbors, the compulsive use of work as escape, purposeless accumulation. The constant fear of not having enough can potentially become destructive patterns. And as Thoreau would explain, any legitimate pursuit can transform into obsession. But then, how do you distinguish between the two? The central question is, who's in command of your life, you or your financial fears? It's possible to master a healthy ambition, but an obsession with money that you can't control is a prison. If you have doubts, ask yourself a simple question. Given the damage this race is causing to your health, your relationships, your inner peace, would you be willing to stop? If the answer is no, you're trapped. And if you can't give up the pattern or keep your promise to live more simply, then you've fallen into the trap that Thoreau so often warned about. There's been a long debate about what causes this unbridled pursuit. While some explain it as a problem that resides in people, a more accurate explanation is that this race is the result of the interaction between the individual and society. This obsession arises when a person regularly yearns for a change in their state of being, for a sense of security or value, and becomes dependent on money and what it represents to generate this desired change. Practically every action we take is an attempt to solve the problem of our existence, to find our place in the world. And the pursuit of money is no different. It's just a more visible and socially acceptable form of trying to solve deep existential questions. Given that we are and always will be surrounded by a culture that values accumulation and consumption, in this video we're going to explore the personal side of the equation. What makes some people more susceptible to this trap than others? Thoreau spent years living simply, deliberately away from the hustle that characterized the society around him. And as he argues in his writings, every unbridled pursuit of money, whether severe or moderate, is an attempt to find relief from suffering and existential fear. This race always has its origin in suffering, whether visible or hidden in the unconscious. Much more than a search for real security, chronic accumulation is the attempt to escape the pain of not knowing who you are or what your life really means. The forms of pain that lead an individual to this pursuit are numerous and varied. Some become obsessed with money as a way to deal with deep insecurities or anxiety disorders. Others to escape empty relationships or meaningless jobs. And still others to avoid the suffering of lack of purpose or hopelessness in the face of the existential void of their lives. Thoreau recounts that during his years at Walden, he met many men who worked from sunrise to sunset, accumulating properties and wealth, but who seemed more miserable each day. When he asked why they continued in that routine, many answered something like, "I don't know, I'm just trying to secure my future, fulfill a need for security." Boredom with life, simply lack of direction, disguised as responsibility. In many cases, the pain one seeks to escape through this race has roots in the past, especially in childhood. Thoreau observed that those who grew up in homes where a person's value was measured by their material achievements, where love was conditional on success, developed a distorted relationship with money. As he wrote, "All the influences of childhood leave deep marks, sometimes with results that imprison us for life. The influence of family and society on someone's development and their relationship with money cannot be underestimated. Just as a child absorbs the values around them, in the first years of life, when our worldview is being formed, we're emotionally and psychologically absorbing beliefs about money, success, and personal value from those around us. A childhood where love was conditioned on achievements, where affection came only when you stood out, deeply suppresses self-esteem and creates a compulsive need to prove value through accumulation." Thoreau explains that many people say they work so hard to secure the future, but more than that, their sense of self-worth has become completely tied to what they possess. The reward systems in the brain, the areas responsible for self-image, simply cannot develop healthily under such circumstances. When you learn from early on that you're only loved when you produce, when you only have value if you achieve, the race for money becomes a matter of emotional survival. But it's not just the explicit pressure for success that creates this trap. People who grew up with emotionally absent parents, even if financially present, are also much more prone to this compulsive pursuit in adult life. The father may be physically present and satisfy all material needs, buying everything the child needs. However, due to stress, depression, or simply their own obsession with work, the father doesn't emotionally nurture the child. A child can also develop this distorted relationship with money when parents are physically present but emotionally distant. Under normal circumstances, a child who perceives this emotional absence will seek connection in other ways. If they don't find it in affection, they may begin to associate value with material achievements, developing inadequate mechanisms of self-validation through possessions or status. Children who didn't receive genuine emotional presence have a higher risk of seeking validation in external achievements later in life. But currently, even people who had a relatively healthy childhood aren't completely immune to this trap. Because just as in other cultural crises in history, when entire societies turn to collective destructive patterns, nowadays many resort to the unbridled pursuit of money as a way to deal with the anxiety provoked by a culture that measures human value by material achievements. Furthermore, the fact that to fit into the modern world, it's necessary to constantly consume, work excessively, and use financial success as a measure of value results in the perfect social storm that created this mass existential crisis. Thoreau wrote, "A sense of emptiness pervades our civilization. The one who perceives this emptiness is more painfully conscious than most. Many of us resemble each other in our ineffective efforts to fill the spiritual black hole at the center, where we've lost touch with what really matters. Our culture, obsessed with acquisition, productivity, and image, only serves to deepen this void, leaving us more lost than before. Given the number of people who grow up learning that value is measured by achievements, along with the current state of society that glorifies overwork, it's no surprise that many desperately chase money as a way to prove they exist, that they matter, that they have value. This movement isn't totally irrational or ineffective, because the pursuit of financial security works, at least temporarily. It's very effective at alleviating immediate anxiety and fear of an uncertain future. As Thoreau observed in his writings, "It's so I don't feel the emptiness I feel when I stop running, when I'm silent with myself." Accumulation isn't only effective at providing relief from existential fear, because material achievement can also temporarily elevate someone from the monotony of daily life and lead them to experiences charged with social validation, recognition among peers, and even a superficial but real joy. Thoreau, in his years living at Walden, closely observed how this dynamic works. He saw men who worked incessantly, who accumulated properties and wealth, and who experienced genuine moments of satisfaction when they reached their financial goals. The problem wasn't the satisfaction itself, but its ephemeral nature. As he described, it's like chasing shadows at sunset. You can reach them for an instant, but they soon move, and you find yourself running again. This is the treacherous nature of this pursuit. It works well enough to keep you trapped, but never well enough to set you free. You get the promotion you wanted so badly and feel a wave of accomplishment. For days, maybe weeks, you feel on top of the world. But gradually, almost imperceptibly, that feeling begins to fade. And then you look around and realize there's another rung to climb, another goal to reach, another standard of living to maintain. What makes this cycle particularly insidious is that each achievement reinforces the belief that the next one will be different, will be the one that finally brings lasting peace. You think, if I can just earn a little bit more, then I'll be able to relax. But when you get there, you discover that your needs have also grown, that your expectations have adjusted, that the threshold of enough has risen along with your income. However, although this pursuit can work in the short term, by depending on external achievements for internal validation, a terrible price is paid over time. The more we persist in this race, the more our need for more grows, and the more we depend on external achievements to feel any sense of self-worth. Slowly but surely, money and what it represents become the focal point of our lives, while everything else that could provide lasting satisfaction fades into the periphery. Thoreau wrote about men he had met who possessed vast properties, but whose lives were narrow and impoverished in all the senses that really matter. They had extensive lands, but never walked through them simply to feel the wind on their faces. They had large houses, but were rarely present in them in body and soul. They had families, but saw them only in the brief hours between one workday and another. What gradually happens is a reversal of priorities so subtle that many don't even notice. You start out saying you work so hard to provide a better life for your family, but little by little, the family becomes secondary to the work that supposedly serves it. You say you're building security for the future, but you completely sacrifice the present, which is the only time that really exists. Your health begins to deteriorate. First, there are small signs: frequent headaches, tension in the shoulders, poor sleep. You ignore it because you're too busy to pay attention. Then come more serious problems: high blood pressure, digestive issues, chronic exhaustion. But you continue because stopping seems impossible. You've created a standard of living that requires you to continue, and now you're hostage to the very choices you made. Your relationships suffer in ways you may not realize until it's too late. You're physically present but emotionally absent. Your children learn not to bother you with small things because you're always tired or worried about work. Your partner gradually stops sharing important things because you no longer have the emotional energy to process anything beyond professional demands. And perhaps most tragic, your creativity, your capacity to wonder, your connection with what makes you feel alive are dying little by little. You stop reading books that aren't work-related. Stop having hobbies that don't add value professionally. Stop doing anything simply for the pleasure of doing it. Everything needs to have a productive purpose, needs to take you somewhere, needs to contribute to this mountain you're trying to climb without ever reaching the top. Furthermore, this obsession alters our mental structure in ways that undermine our capacity for conscious choice. When we're trapped in this race, we often find ourselves in what could be called existential autopilot, where our actions follow conditioned patterns, while part of our mind observes helplessly, knowing we're destroying our peace, our health, and our potential to live fully, but unable to change course. Thoreau described this phenomenon with painful clarity. He spoke of men who lived as if trapped in deep tracks that they themselves had dug with years of repetitive routine. The deeper the tracks, the harder to get out of them. You wake up at the same time, follow the same routine, respond to the same stimuli in the same way, day after day, year after year. And at some point you realize you're no longer consciously choosing, you're just automatically reacting. What makes this particularly distressing is that there are moments of lucidity, instants when you clearly see the absurdity of it all. Maybe it's in the middle of a sleepless night, when you look at the ceiling and wonder if it's really worth it. Or in a rare moment of quiet, when you feel a pang of something that could be called regret or deep sadness. But in the morning, the alarm goes off, and you're back on the treadmill because stopping seems scarier than continuing. This state isn't different from other forms of compulsive behavior. You know, rationally, that you're trapped in a pattern that doesn't serve you. You may even verbalize this to yourself or to others. But intellectual knowledge alone isn't enough to break neurological tracks that have been dug for years or decades of repetition. That's why so many people remain trapped, not from lack of insight, but from lack of access to a different way of being. Thoreau observed that many of the men he knew could perfectly articulate the problem. They knew they were wasting their lives in pursuit of things that didn't matter. But between knowing and changing, there's an enormous abyss, and crossing it requires more than simple recognition. It requires a fundamental restructuring of how you relate to fear, value, and purpose. Given the strong grip of this pursuit, the vital question arises: what's the possibility of escape? The problem when facing any attempt at a renewed and simpler life is that the same mechanism that needs to heal the soul is what's conditioned by society. As Thoreau warns us, the more intense the race, the greater the distortion of values, and the greater the internal obstacles to achieving a genuinely free and meaningful life. Fortunately, we're remarkably resilient beings. Even after decades in this race, it's possible to completely restructure the way we relate to money, success, and personal value. It's possible to live, perhaps for the first time, a full, healthy, and truly free life. Thoreau is living proof of this. He wasn't born with a mystical understanding of simplicity. He arrived at it through questioning, experimentation, and the courage to live in a radically different way from what everyone around him was doing. This brings us to an interesting concept that Thoreau not only taught but lived: deliberate consciousness. He wrote in Walden, "I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life, and see if I could not learn what it had to teach." This phrase captures the essence of a possible transformation: the conscious choice to live according to what really matters to you, not what society says should matter. This way of living can interrupt the cycle of unbridled pursuit in a way that simple willpower never could. Because instead of succumbing to the constant pressures to accumulate and produce, to compare and compete, it allows the person to experience life with deep simplicity and genuine purpose. It's not about renouncing everything and going to live in a cabin in the woods, although Thoreau did exactly that for a period. It's about questioning every aspect of your life and asking, does this really serve what I value, or am I doing this on autopilot? For Thoreau, the process of overcoming any destructive pattern begins with deep and honest awareness. Without the capacity to look inward and recognize one's own internal mechanisms, the fears that drive your choices, the unquestioned beliefs that govern your life, the individual is doomed to repeat the same behaviors generation after generation without realizing the deep origin of their dissatisfaction. This awareness process isn't comfortable. In fact, it can be deeply uncomfortable. It's looking at your life and admitting that maybe you've wasted years chasing things that don't matter. It's recognizing that maybe you've sacrificed relationships, health, and peace of mind in the name of a security that never fully materializes. It's facing the fact that you may have become exactly the type of person you swore you'd never be. But this discomfort, this brutal honesty with yourself, is also the beginning of the possibility of real change. Because you can't transform what you can't see. You can't change patterns that you don't even recognize as patterns. And you certainly can't create a different life if you continue operating with the same unconscious beliefs that created the life you have now. The first step, then, is simply to stop and look. Not with judgment, not with paralyzing guilt, but with honest curiosity. To ask, why do I do what I do? Where does this need for always more come from? What do I really fear will happen if I stop running? These questions, when asked with sincerity, begin to reveal the invisible threads that keep you trapped. This awareness process is a crucial step for transformation, as it allows the individual to realize that the race for money isn't a solution, but an escape from the true existential problem. The first step toward overcoming it, then, is to recognize this pursuit for what it really is and the impact it has on your life. This may seem simple, but many people find themselves trapped in the cycle of denial for years, never deeply questioning the reasons that lead them to work non-stop. When this race is finally recognized as an escape from deeper questions, when you clearly see that you're using work and accumulation as anesthesia to avoid feeling or facing more difficult things, the liberation process can truly begin. But this is just the first step in a journey that can be long and challenging. From this point of awareness, the individual must reflect deeply on the aspects of their life that led them to this trap. Where does this belief that you always need more come from? Was it something your parents taught, perhaps without words, just through how they lived their own lives? Was it the culture around you, the messages you absorbed since childhood about what it means to be successful, about what makes a person valuable? Reflection is essential, because without it, the person cannot understand the deep and often unconscious causes of their behaviors. You may know intellectually that you're trapped in an endless race, but understanding emotionally why you keep running, what you're really fleeing from or seeking, requires a different type of investigation. As Thoreau described in his writings, Human life is full of layers of social conditioning and cultural beliefs that often remain completely hidden until the individual is willing to look within themselves with courage and honesty. It's not easy to question everything you've always taken for granted. It's not comfortable to admit that perhaps most of what you believe about success and value you simply absorbed without ever questioning whether it really made sense for who you are. This unbridled pursuit, according to Thoreau, is an external manifestation of what's hidden internally. Deep fears of not being enough, of not having value, of not mattering. It's an unconscious attempt to resolve through external means what can only be resolved internally through self-knowledge and genuine self-acceptance. When the person begins to honestly reflect on their relationship with money and success, they're actually beginning to walk the path that Thoreau called deliberate living. Living deliberately, a concept that's at the heart of Thoreau's philosophy, is the process of consciously integrating all aspects of life, both those you admire in yourself and those you prefer to ignore or deny, into a conscious and chosen totality. This means looking at the fears that drive your behaviors, at the repetitive patterns you inherited, at the unquestioned beliefs that govern your choices. All this without paralyzing judgment, but with genuine willingness to understand what they have to teach about who you've become and who you could be. This process of deep self-knowledge and honest reflection can be extremely painful. It can involve crying over lost years, over opportunities that passed while you were too busy to notice them, over relationships that withered because you didn't have the emotional presence to nurture them. But it's also the only door to true freedom, to a life that's genuinely yours and not just a copy of what everyone around you is doing. In the case of this pursuit of money, deep and honest reflection helps the person identify the specific thought patterns and underlying emotions that sustain compulsive behavior. For example, someone may begin to realize that excessive work has become a sophisticated way of avoiding deep feelings of inadequacy that come from childhood, or that the need to accumulate more and more is actually an attempt to feel safe in a world that seems threatening and unpredictable. The race, when seen with this depth, is rarely really about money. It's about what money symbolizes and represents: security against the unknown, proof of value in a society that measures people by their achievements, protection against the fear of being insignificant or forgettable. It's an elaborate defense mechanism against the existential void, against the frightening awareness of our mortality and the fundamental uncertainty of life. When the person can reflect on this with honesty, when they can look at their behaviors and see the wounds and fears that feed them, something extraordinary becomes possible. They can begin to seek healthier and more genuine ways of building a sense of personal value, of creating real security instead of illusory, of finding meaning in places where it can actually be found. They can begin to replace the frantic external pursuit with a gradual internal process of self-knowledge and self-acceptance that, although slower and less spectacular, is infinitely more sustainable and true. Practically every choice we make is an attempt to solve the problem of how to live well. And this pursuit of money is no different. It's just a more visible form of repetitive action, creating deep mental patterns. Over time, these patterns become so ingrained that they seem inevitable and at a certain point, inescapable. Both Thoreau and The Wisdom of Living more simply approach this question in a similar way. Both suggest that the solution passes through the transcendence of the belief that you are what you possess or achieve. However, there are nuances. Thoreau seeks to solve the problem by working to integrate the different dimensions of life in harmony. When this happens, the person stops being at war with themselves, seeking external validation, and thus experiences a sense of genuine wholeness. What initiates an awakening to what really matters and a radical change in how we live. This change in consciousness is so profound that it also completely transforms patterns of compulsive pursuit. The most common mistake people make when dealing with this race is thinking it's simply a matter of having more discipline or willpower. In reality, this unbridled pursuit is exactly the opposite of that. It's a reflection of the recognition that the problem goes beyond simple individual choices. This doesn't diminish personal responsibility, but recognizes the need for a deeper transformation, for a fundamental change in how we understand value, success, and the purpose of life. If someone truly wants to escape this trap, they need to go beyond superficial solutions. Although the liberation process is ultimately an inner journey, Thoreau recognized that the support of a conscious community plays a crucial role. Human beings are by nature social beings, and our worldview is deeply influenced by relationships with others. This means that although this race has roots in internal conflicts, it's also related to social and cultural dynamics that can reinforce or hinder change. In other words, the liberation journey cannot be done in isolation in a society that constantly reinforces materialistic values. It's essential to create or find spaces where different values are honored, where simplicity is seen as wealth and where purpose is more important than accumulation. Thoreau believed that we develop within a network of relationships and influences that profoundly shape how we see the world. In the context of this pursuit of money, this means that the social environment, friendships, work culture, and even the broader structures of society can facilitate or hinder the process of living more deliberately and freely. This race often takes root in an existential isolation in which the individual disconnects from what really matters, whether through social pressure, fear of judgment, or the perception that they need to constantly compete. The liberation journey, therefore, must be accompanied by a process of reconnection with deeper values. This implies actively questioning consumerist culture, creating support networks with people who value simplicity and authenticity, and building a life based on conscious choices. Relationships with people who live more deliberately can offer a space of understanding, acceptance, and growth, essential elements for this transformation. However, not all influences are positive, and it's fundamental that the individual consciously distance themselves from environments that constantly reinforce the idea that value is measured by material achievements. The process of living deliberately thus involves a conscious selection of the people and environments that are most beneficial for genuine growth. Many intentional communities and groups of people seeking to live more simply offer a powerful support network. In these spaces, individuals facing similar challenges come together to share their experiences, difficulties, and discoveries. The simple act of listening and being heard by others who understand can have a significant transformative effect. Thoreau understood that shared experiences and collective narratives help the individual feel they're not alone in their quest for a more authentic life, providing a sense of belonging that's essential. Deep down, this unbridled pursuit of money is a deeply dysfunctional attempt to solve a spiritual problem, a void that's shared by most people, whether they're conscious of it or not. As Thoreau lived and taught through his example, not all stories have a perfect ending, but the discoveries of deep reflection, the teachings of a simpler life, and the revelations that come when we stop running assure us that no human being is ever beyond the possibility of living more fully, more freely, and more truly. The question that remains is, are you willing to question? Willing to stop for a moment and honestly look at your relationship with money, work, and what you consider success? Because maybe, just maybe, the life you're looking for isn't on the other side of one more achievement, but on the other side of the courage to live more simply, more deliberately, more authentically. And if this video made you think, if it provoked questions you've been avoiding, leave a like, subscribe to the channel. But most importantly, stop for a moment today and ask yourself, who's really in command of my life, me or my fears about money?